Good afternoon, colleagues, staff, and members of the gallery. Welcome to the 21st special meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. As necessary, the committee will recess at approximately 6:30 p.m. for dinner as required. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to item 2.1, the update of the multi-year budget, anything that has to do with the Middlesex London Health Unit, as an employee of that board, and I was wondering if it might be possible to disaggregate the portions of the conversation with respect to that. And the second is with respect to 4.2, the resignation from the Middlesex London Health Unit Board of Directors, again, as the board is my employer.
So noted. Thank you. Any other disclosures? Well then, seeing none. Colleagues, what I'd like to do is I would like to leave the consent item to the end of this meeting for, I think now is obvious reasons. It might involve the most discussion. So what we'll do is I will advise you under 3, we have no scheduled items, but under items for direction, we have the 5th report of the governance working group, 4.1, and I'll ask Councillor Morgan to report.
Thank you, Chair. So the governance working group has been working at Council's direction on a selection process for appointments to boards, our advisory committees and council committees. And we finally completed that work for SPPC's consideration. And so what you see before you is our recommendation for a change in policy and a selection process for appointing them. We've gone through testing of basically a process right in the eScribe voting system, so it's built right into the system we use. We've developed a process that generally follows a preferential system. It's not a ranked system, but it is a preferential system. It is basically a selection process that would narrow it down to choices that council can make. And the clerks today have the ability to demo just an example of what it would look like, just with a one-vote simple majority system, so people can see and get a feel for it. And I know if people would like to spend some time and work with it, that our clerk staff would be happy to go through any questions or comments that you have with you before this comes to council for approval. But certainly we're here today and this is the committee's recommendation based on our work. And I know Barb Westlake Power is prepared to demo that in an example vote in the system so colleagues could see if that's what council would like to do.
Any comments or questions for the chair or for the clerk's office with respect to the governance working group? So you're moving that, Councillor Morgan. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis? Final comments, questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. But I think the offer was there to see a demo. I'd prefer to see that prior to a vote.
You mean versus hearing me speak? I understand that. Perfect. So there's been a request made to see the demo. Clerks, I'll turn it to you, please.
Thank you. And through the chair, you should be able to see on your screen below the preloaded recommendation for this item that we've preloaded a sample election. And so this election has been preloaded to do one appointment. So you'll only be able to vote for one of the options, which you'll see in just a moment. In a real case scenario, we would have all of the information on your agenda of the candidates, and the slate could be established at the committee, but this is just to demonstrate the voting process. So you'll be able to vote for one candidate in this election. So this election has been set up. It will require a 50% plus 1 in order for the selection to be completed. Otherwise, we would move to an additional round. You will note in the voting options that abstain is there, but it's the expectation that all members would vote unless they have a conflict. So all members in attendance have voted, so I will close the vote. It's up there. So there hasn't been a majority achieved, so we would have a runoff vote in this case. And based on the policy, Bosque Pear would be removed because it did not receive any votes at all. And Raspberry would also drop off, having received the lowest votes. So we'll run another round for a runoff. And you'll be able to choose one of the remaining options. So the runoff will be in alphabetical order: golden banana, kiwi fruit, mac apple, or pomegranate.
Colleagues, I know we take this seriously. Vote for one.
Closing the vote. So kiwi fruit has achieved 50%, but not past the threshold. So mac apple will now drop off because it's the lowest vote, and we'll do another runoff. So we're closing the vote. And kiwi fruit has achieved 57% of the vote. So now the committee would have the option to pass the motion to make that appointment based on that.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Well, having seen that in action, I would say that's a big improvement over what we have been doing. I look forward to using it in the future.
There's nothing left to say, really. I think that's covered. Any other comments, though? Thank you, by the way, clerks, for that. That's helpful. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just say that the governance working group has worked on this through several meeting cycles. I want to express sincere thanks to the clerks for all the extra work that they put into this, because believe me, we tried to break it. We tried to make it fail several times to see if we could come up with a scenario that they did not have a solution for. And by trial and error, they've come up with something that even my esteemed colleague, Councillor Van Holst, wasn't able to muck with the results in at the last governance working group. So I think that we've got a good system here.
That's actually after years of misspent youth. I'm sure you tried to break it hard. Okay, any other comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. Will fruit salad be available with dinner tonight? No fruit salad?
I think not. Any other comments, questions? I'm sorry? Are you good, Councillor Turner? All right, thank you. There's a motion duly seconded. I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote, and I hope we get a majority somewhere in there.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. 4.2, we have a letter from Councillor Pelosi resigning from the Middlesex London Health Unit Board of Directors. I'll look for a motion to receive. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any comments, questions? Colleagues, I'll mention to you in this vote that we have another SPPC meeting 2 weeks from today, and I would like councillors to give this due consideration. And if any and all of you are interested in applying to fill this position, I would ask you to consider it, and we will look to secure that and have that done in 2 weeks' time. So there's a motion on the floor. Seeing no comments, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 13-0 with 1 recuse.
Thank you very much. As this is a special meeting, there are no deferred matters nor additional business to be considered. So I will turn your attention to the consent agenda 2.1. We're asking Councillor Morgan in his capacity as budget chair to take us through this. And Councillor, I'll ask you for a moment just to report from your seat, if you will, because I know that both you and our treasurer want to make some comments. I'll turn it over to you to get this process started, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So first off, I want to thank colleagues for taking the time to make the time for this meeting today. In discussions with the treasurer, we both felt it was important to ask the mayor, which he duly did call a special meeting to give an update on where we stand on the budget targets and our progress towards them. What you'll see today is a presentation from the treasurer on updating on that. And in the report, a number of options that we're looking to consider. What I will say is the intention today is not to pre-debate the budget in any sort of way. The intention is really to provide an update to council and then set us forward on a possible process where we would have more options in the budget process down the road, as well as potential delegations from groups like the EMS group. So I'll turn it over to our treasurer, who has a slideshow presentation, and then I'll make some comments after she's done.
All right, thank you, through the chair. So essentially, I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of the agenda in terms of what it is I'm going to talk about. So in the effort to be transparent in terms of the information that we've recently received, we wanted to bring forward some information to council so that you understand some of the challenges that we have in context of our council-approved targets, as well as look at a path forward that might provide some options for how we will manage this process, noting some of the challenges that we have. So essentially, moving forward, just to recap in terms of where we had proposed to be. So back in May, we had provided a bit of a path forward in terms of identifying the cost to maintain existing services. We had estimated at approximately 2.2%, and we had also identified that approximately 0.5% on an average annual increase to look at an average annual tax levy increase of 2.7 as a target for our multi-year budget. So Based on that, we submitted guidelines that were issued in May to all of our service areas as well as our civic boards and commissions to look at increases that on average would target 1.5% annually. And noting that we had some challenges in our corporate financing to address the capital plan that was going to need a little bit more capacity to look at that. So those were guidelines that were issued and put out. And what I do want to note is when we put that report forward, we did not know about the provincial downloading at that time. Shortly after I had provided the report and tabled that, we had identified through the provincial announcements that we were going to have some challenges with some additional costs that the province was going to be passing through to us. So originally, we were looking at approximately 0.2 to 0.3 is what we were estimating the cost to be on average over the 4 years. So this is where we thought we were going to be, and we knew that based on those additional challenges that we were going to have a little bit of a hard time meeting this target. So further to that, we've been trying to, we've now received all of the information, and this chart, I know there's a lot on here, but I just want to walk you through in terms of the information that we have, and I'm focusing specifically on 2020, noting that's our greatest challenge, and probably the one that has the greatest pressure, but just to identify where we're at specifically in terms of trying to take you through what is comprised of that approximately 4% that we had identified. So essentially, the civic service areas have submitted their base budgets. And what you'll note is that the average annual increase that has been submitted, and this includes all of the corporate financing as well, that, so we've lumped it all in together just for purposes of the presentation, but as part of the base budget, all of the transfers to the reserves, all of the capital programs, all of our contingencies in addition to the base budget is included there. So roughly on average, we're at about 2.3%, so fairly close to what we had originally identified. So in addition to that, we have the provincial impacts, which has roughly proven itself to be approximately 5.5% across both the civic service areas as well as the boards and commissions. So approximately, it's a little higher than, on the higher end than what we were anticipating over the course of the 4 years. So when you look at the provincial impacts, you can see that when you add that on, that certainly is a great challenge. And when you look at the base budgets that were submitted, even the boards and commissions that based on their submissions are roughly in line with what we had anticipated them to be. What you can see significantly is that the key driver, particularly in 2020 on the boards and commissions, is the provincial impacts that have come forward through the budget submissions, that they're also facing those challenges. So on top of that, so when you look at all of those all together, we're actually close to the 2.7%. But what I do want to note is that on top of all of that, we received a little bit of a surprise in that the land ambulance submission was just recently provided to us that indicated a 32.9% increase over 2019. So roughly, that's almost 1% of the roughly 3.9% that we have identified. So it's quite significant over the course of the 4 years. So what I do want to highlight specifically, though, is that these numbers do not include any additional investments. There's no incremental amounts for support for housing, to address the downtown plan, to look at subsidized transit and making that a permanent program. So really when we were looking at all these numbers for, in the essence of transparency is to identify the challenges that we're having and trying to look for a path forward is really where it brings to come before you and to look for some alternatives that we can try to help manage the impacts of this so that we can present a budget to you that is in the realm of something that will be a little more manageable for council to consider. So based on that, we have a couple recommended next steps so that council direct us to go back and develop business cases for potential reductions in the civic service areas that council can consider as a supplement to the multi-year budget to look at that. In addition, because the increases are so significant, it's going to be challenging to do it only looking at the base budget for civic administration. So as part of that is to basically be asking the boards and commissions to also go back and take a look at their budgets to see that if there's anything else that they can do in terms of identifying potential opportunities for reductions, as well as to be prepared to address the impacts of what a reduction would mean to their budget if council had to make those choices. And in addition, given the very significant increase for the land ambulance, we are recommending that the Middlesex London Paramedic Service be invited to attend a future SPPC meeting to provide an overview of their budget and their pressures and potential opportunities for reductions. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to Martin Hayward, who also has a couple other items to add to that.
So through the chair, I just wanted to bring to your attention, there's been some misinformation circulating recently about the land ambulance, specifically the Middlesex London Paramedic Service. There's two numbers that we're worried about when we're concerned about increases. One is the gross budget, and the other is the net budget, sort of the net impact on the city. The first number, both were provided to us by the county. The gross budget, when it first was submitted at around 18% increase. That's then split through a formula between the province, the city, and the county in order to fund it. And we were told by the county that city share would be increasing by approximately 32%, and that's the 32% that you see up there, which means that then the provincial portion would go down fairly significantly. Since then, and after meeting with us, the county has been able to reduce the gross budget to around a 15% increase. But the county has not provided any detail at this point to establish the revised city number, and we need various pieces of information for that, including call volumes and a whole bunch of other things, which we don't have. I would like the record to be cleared on this so that you understand what we're dealing with, and also maybe have Ms. Barbon just walk you through a chronology to hopefully correct the record.
So thank you. So just to give you a little bit of an identification of the chronology that we've been working through to get the information. So over the summer, my staff worked closely with them to be able to communicate the budget, deadlines, the information required, and have some initial meetings to review the City of London requirements and follow up on status. On October 1st, they met with the finance staff and provided budget pressures verbally and walked through all of the challenges that they had. The City of London requested the full documented budget submission from the Middlesex London Paramedic Services. Later that day, a screenshot of the total budget request was sent to the City of London finance staff, who then requested that the details of the budget be provided to us for analysis purposes. On October 7th, Finance followed up again for additional budget details. On October 9th, Finance followed up again for additional budget details. On October 25th, Mr. Hayward and myself met with the land ambulance area to discuss the budget drivers, their challenges, and request ways to identify a reduced submitted budget. We acknowledged at that time that they were facing many pressures indeed, including their offloading, their dispatch, call volume increases, their increased capital needs, as well as reserve shortfalls. So on October 31st, through the media, it was communicated that the land ambulance numbers provided in the report to you today was inaccurate. The city then requested an updated submission from them, noting that their budget numbers had been provided to us, and if there was a more accurate number that they could please indeed provide. On November 1st, they provided a revised, reduced submission, as Mr. Hayward has noted, only sharing the revised gross operating budget costs with no information to identify any cost sharing. We requested a breakdown of the cost-sharing estimates and supporting details at that time, and I was later advised that they could not predict the breakdown of call volumes between the county and the city, but would be happy to provide me with a copy of the agreement to do so.
Thank you. I think before I turn the chair over to Councillor Morgan, he has a few comments.
Yes, I just wanted to provide some additional context. First, I wanted to thank our staff for pulling together this information. Some of the information you see before us was received late last week and even over the weekend, particularly the stuff in the slide presentations. The report, the information was received about 5 or 6 days before the report was available to you. So they've really pulled this together very quickly, and in an effort to keep council very updated on where we're tracking versus its budget targets. Because there was a couple of, when the stories broke on this last week, there was a couple of misconceptions, and I think our treasurer articulated it very well today, is that although 4% and 3.2% may seem not too far off where the last council landed, these numbers don't include anything in our strategic plan. They don't include continuation of the subsidized transit programs that we have. They don't include the core area response. They don't include any of the business cases that you're going to see before you in the budget process. And so, assuming council wants to support a number of those things, we could be fairly far off of the council-defined target. And so the purpose of this meeting today is really to provide you with that update so you know that where we're tracking. The second purpose is to solicit some feedback from council and direction for possible options. The two possible places for options are, first, looking within the civic administration structure. And I will say the base budgets, when you look at what has been submitted, have really come in pretty much on target. And so what we're looking for is options to be provided. And in most cases, that may be service reductions. We're not voting on engaging in service reductions today. We're just providing some direction to bring forward options for us to consider in the budget process, which would be the opportunity cost trade-offs between here's some things we could reduce to be able to invest in other things. It is at council's full discretion in the budget process to actually adjust its target and do everything. But what we're suggesting today is let's bring forward some possible options so that at least they're there on the table for consideration. The second place to get some options from is from our boards and commissions. And I want to be very clear. This is not a rejection of their budget submissions. They've done very good work on their base budgets, and you can see that they are also impacted by some decisions that are beyond their control, whether that's decisions in their space or decisions by another level of government. So asking them to bring forward some options is certainly not any sort of criticisms of the budgets they brought forward. It's the same thing we're asking civic administration to do. And if council is going to look to make some adjustments, we would be much better served to do that with the expert advice of our boards and commissions rather than without. And so again, asking them for some options. Recently, I know the Police Services Board took another look at their budget. They reduced it slightly. That's the type of thing that we're really asking of the boards and commissions, is to take another look. And if they want to forward some possible areas that could be reduced, we'd be happy to consider those and, you know, maybe approve them, maybe we don't, but that would be part of the budget discussion and the public discussion in the budget process. And the third, given the size of the Middlesex London Paramedic Service, again, this is not a criticism or rendering judgment on the quality of that service or the need for an investment or an increase, but simply the desire for council, given the size of the increase, to have them invited to come before us to present on the details of the increases and what they're needed for and what the service demands are, and to be able to engage with them for a discussion. Again, what we're not looking for today is a debate or defense of civic areas or boards and commissions. It's really options for your consideration, and I think we would be well served to kind of keep the debate towards whether or not we want to pursue those options rather than get into the individual merits of each individual service. Because again, what we don't have before us is the details of their budget submission, because this is not debating the budget at this point. This is the possibility of providing options before us. So I wanted to provide that context for council. I know the mayor's going to ask me to chair this piece, and I'll look forward to your thoughts, and I'll try to run it as smoothly as I can. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. I am now going to ask you to chair the balance of the budget discussion for this special meeting.
Okay, colleagues, so you have a staff report before you. There are recommended actions in it for committee's consideration. Again, this is committee, so, you know, we certainly can have a discussion or answer questions. You just heard a presentation from our staff. I anticipate colleagues may have some questions, so we could start off with questions at the time when a colleague feels they want to take some action on the staff recommendations. I'd certainly entertain a mover and a seconder, but I anticipate there'll likely be some questions. So I'll start a speakers list for our staff, for anybody who has thoughts. Councillor Lehman, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Through to staff, as this is my first time to go through a four-year budget process, I want to be clear in understanding what is legislatively mandated, a scope of our council. So, for example, on conservation authorities, are we allowed to, what is our scope in coming back to them for requests of reductions, or are we just basically have to agree to whatever they bring forth?
Ms. Parmon.
Thank you, through the chair. So there are a number of the boards and commissions that do legislatively have a requirement that we have to pay. Certainly the conservation authorities have submitted their budgets. There's nothing to obligate them to follow through and provide reductions, but certainly we could work with them to see if there were any options, and if there was something that they may choose to bring forward, they could certainly do so. So there's a number, so health unit, the police, the conservation authorities, land ambulance as well are a number of the ones that are a little bit more challenging, that have a regulatory statute to pay.
Just a follow-up. Are we mandated to partner with Middlesex County in delivering ambulance services for the citizens of London?
Mr. Card.
Mr. Chairman, yes, Middlesex County was appointed by the province as the service provider. I believe it was in around 2002, somewhere in that range. And they have been the land ambulance service provider since then. So there is a county mandate, and we are required to pay our share of the expense of running the land ambulance. We have entered into a series of agreements with the county that defines how the proportion that we pay will be calculated. So that's where we stand.
Further speakers? Okay, you're waving it off. Councillor Squire and then Councillor Sully.
Mine's really simple. Could I have a copy of your presentation, please? It would have been, quite frankly, it would have been helpful to have it before the meeting, but I understand if it was prepared late, but it would be really helpful as a councillor to have that presentation.
Through the chair, we've provided it to the clerk, who will ensure that's circulated to everybody through the minutes.
Councillor Sully.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I know I asked this question 4 years ago, similar to a question asked by Councillor Lehman, and to follow up with that, I forget the answer when I asked it when Middlesex London ambulance service was here. What is the reporting relationship, if any, which my understanding is there's not, and in other municipalities, for example, Toronto with, I guess, one tier, they report directly through the city manager or some of those service areas there. Can you kind of let us know what the relationship is we have? I know they're not a board, so we don't have any elected officials on there to bring our lens. So I just if you could help me there, that'd be helpful.
Ms. Parmon.
So through the chair, the I always want to call them EMS, the Land Ambulance Services are a commission of the county, so they report into the county council, and that they have a separate board that is a subset of the county council and some of the civic administration that they report up through. So legislatively, there's no tie to the City of London. There is a cost-sharing agreement in place with the City of London, where there is a clear cost-sharing obligation, and so they're responsible for running the service, but we pay a share that is determined through this agreement. So there essentially is really, we have a good working relationship historically to share information. There are a number of services that the city delivers as the consolidated service manager for the county, where we have other cost sharing in place as well. So traditionally, we've worked quite closely with them on a more of an information sharing basis, but there's no direct tie-in to having the city representatives or as part of the county through that land ambulance service in any way.
Thank you. And through the chair, my follow-up question, final question on this, do we know of any other municipalities in a similar scenario where there's a county and a municipality, but at the same time they have representation on, I guess, this commission or have an opportunity? Because I know the last time I saw them was a few years ago, and the relationship is, that's the extent of the relationship that we have. So I'm just curious about that through the chair.
Ms. Barbon or Mr. Card together looking at each other.
Through the chair, I'm not aware of, I know that there are many other, where there is a county and a city, many other municipalities in the county that have cost sharing agreements in place throughout the province. I'm not, it's been a while since I've been involved in that file directly, so I'm not certain of what those relationships are in terms of reporting throughout. If they are similar where they've been delegated, certainly the province at the time of devolution assigned the Middlesex County as the municipal services manager of that service. And then the legislation as it reads clearly outlines that there is a cost sharing between the areas that are serviced by the land ambulance service. So unless Mr. Card is aware of anything else, I'm not familiar, but there may be other models. I'm just not aware of that information, but could certainly look that up.
Mr. Card.
Mr. Chairman, my familiarity with the agreement dates from about a year ago when we redid the agreements, and there wasn't much negotiation at that time. But I can say from having been involved with other municipalities in the past that the province was seeking to have emergency medical services, EMS services, provided on a regional basis. So where a region didn't exist, it looked to apportion, it looked to have the, like London is a separated municipality, of course, and it looked to have a large enough area to have critical mass to support the cost of regional ambulance services. So in a regional municipality, the region would have been looking after it. In a single tier like Ottawa or Toronto, there's only the one tier to worry about. But in other parts of the province, they had originally looked at creating de facto amalgamations for the purpose of providing cost-effective delivery of services. And of course, they're looking at that again now to determine whether or not that's the best model to follow in the future. So we're not sure where it's going to come down. It may be changing, though, within the next year or so.
Okay, my list includes Councillor Turner, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Hopkins, and Councillor Van Meerbergen. So I'll go to Councillor Turner first.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So through you, I guess there's a lot of questions here. The first one, I think, earlier we tallied the effect of downloading to us at around $6.2 million. Is there an updated tally on the annual cost of those provincial downloads, including the ABCs in their increases as well?
Ms. Barbon.
Through the chair, I can ask my staff to get that number. It's roughly about 0.5% on average, so it's a little higher than the 6 million we had originally identified, and I just can't remember off the top of my head, but I can get that and have that presented to you in a few moments.
Thank you, that would be helpful. I know there's been some walkbacks at the provincial level, but there's also been some persistence in the provincial level too. It's quite clear that the primary drivers on our budget are provincial in nature. The province has clearly put this on our backs, and there's not much other place to go. We built some contingency and room to be able to support strategic investments in housing and transit, and a lot of that has been wiped out pretty quickly. I've got some questions around the land ambulance part, and I know that you may be limited in what you'd be able to respond with. So I think what I heard both you and Mr. Hayward talking about was those initial numbers that were reported through the media have been disputed by the county, and they have submitted something different, something in the tune of about 15%. Is that a 15% average over the 4 years, or is that 15% in that first 2020 year?
Through the chair, that is the 15% specifically for the 2020 year, I understand, on a gross basis.
In just even in looking at that, that would, the initial increase would probably be about $5.3 million a year, but that's if that's half of that, then it's about $2.6 million. And then it looks like from there, as it goes through, there's roughly well, if we were to take a little bit off, then it's still about $14.2 million, or about maybe $12 million if you were to reduce that that initial 32% that was projected to about 15%. That's the equivalent of about 100 FTEs. Well, 100 to 120 FTEs over a 4-year period of time, which is a pretty significant increase and rather startling. There are no indications beyond the recent announcement by the province that they would provide a 4% increase to their base funding for the 2019 calendar year, but beyond that, everything else is a bit of a veil. Traditionally, the base funding increases have been about 1.5 to 2%, I believe, on year, and there's a 50-50 cost-sharing formula between the province and the upper-tier municipality for the provision of ambulance services. If I were to read this right, that budget as presented, or as might happen, would significantly skew the 50-50 cost-sharing funding, assuming that the province would not come anywhere close to matching the amount of increase that's projected in these numbers.
Ms. Barbone.
So through the chair, the only information that I have was that original information that was provided to me, and certainly based on one of the reasons behind a significant, we understood based on the very limited information that was provided, you could see that the provincial share was going down quite dramatically over the course of the 4 years. And obviously that means a greater share has to be picked up between the two municipalities. So that was one of the things when we met with them that we had identified that if they could take a look at their numbers and was there potential variances in their estimates, even in the provincial funding, that they might have identified in going back at looking at a reduction. So in the revised submission, I know that the gross budget has decreased. I don't know what the drivers are in those decreases. I also don't know if that impacts the cost sharing between the two municipalities, because I don't know what the provincial share is estimated to be. And we haven't been provided with the information to identify what that is. So certainly we know that the provincial share is not scheduled to increase as much as the service levels. Certainly based on the conversation that they had with us, they do have some challenges in terms of the offload delays, the dispatch, and some of the things that are driving additional the call volume that do result in when they add an ambulance in the first year, the province doesn't pick up those costs until the following year. So there is a greater share in the first year of an additional service that both municipalities have to pick up. But again, I don't have any details in terms of exactly what components are driving that increase.
Okay, when I first took a look at the submission that you shared with the CBC over the 4 years, that's an 87% increase over current budget, which is stunning. If we were to take the 2.6 million off, that's let's see. My math's not good right now on the fly. My apologies. I guess what you'd suggested in the report was that we ask that someone come to present to us. If that's going to be the motion a bit later, I'd also suggest that in advance of that we have a written submission providing a breakdown of the costing, especially that within the cost drivers, so that we have a chance to review that and understand it. And I think that that's essential for us to be able to have informed questions at the time that somebody may or may not present to us. Is that reasonable for us to ask?
It's a question to you, Ms. Barbone.
Through the chair, generally, they provide us that information and have historically provided us the information so that we could take a look at it and, have the details that we would provide through for our submissions. So I think it's an absolutely reasonable ask for them to provide that information. Certainly, I've asked more than once and have not received anything than the gross number that has been provided to me. So I would encourage council that that would be a reasonable request.
Perhaps a final question before we turn it over to somebody else. You mentioned that they just weren't forthcoming with any information. Was there any reason given for why they wouldn't provide us with specific information about their budget or the ask? Was there any reason given for that or any rationale?
Through the chair, based on the response was simply that they couldn't estimate the call volumes between the county and the city and that they could provide me the agreement to calculate it myself. However, given that I don't have the call volumes even for this year or the provincial share of eligible costs, that there's a number of things we require to be able to determine what is even going to be apportioned between the county and the municipality. So that's the only reason that I've received, and that was as of late Friday, so we're before you today, and I have yet to receive any other information.
Thank you. My quick commentary is that's a really ridiculous response. We know pretty clearly what the call apportionment is between the municipalities, both between the county and the city. That's something that's clearly a metric that's done by EMS on a regular and ongoing basis, and is the basis for our cost sharing agreements between the county and the City of London. So I don't buy that, and I'm really disappointed to hear that. So I am looking forward, and I hope that the representatives will take up our invitation to come and speak with us and to provide some further clarity to this item. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councilor Turner. I'll just let you know that we're going to work on some language for a possible addition to C based on your comments. Obviously, that'll be subject to the motion that's moved, but we'll just have that prepared, given you're interested in it, and given that I saw a lot of nodding heads when you made that comment. Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and I agree with so much of what Councillor Turner said about a lot of questions here. Very frustrating to not have information, particularly on the land ambulance piece. I did have a question through you to our staff, and with apologies, there's been a lot to absorb here, so I haven't had the chance to look this up. But certainly through our police budgets, and I actually want to thank the London Police Services for the work that they did going back and looking at their budget already. They've already taken a second look. And some of the growth that they feel that they need has actually been moved from a direct impact on the tax levy to assessment growth as the city grows. Do we have business cases that come forward annually through assessment growth to help with land ambulance services as the city grows?
Ms. Barbone.
So through the chair, last year actually was the first year that we did that, and they actually worked quite closely with us to determine how we could apportion the budget increase that they were presenting to us between the part that was attributable to growth, so that we could fund that through assessment growth. So that was actually something that we did talk about, was to look at how we might potentially do that again this year. And that was certainly part of the conversation we had earlier in October with them, was if we could look at that information and have a little bit more details in terms of identifying what proportion is related to growth, that we could also look at doing that. Without that information, it would just be an arbitrary decision on our end to allocate that, which would be a little bit challenging.
Okay, thank you. Following up on that, I'm going to take the next question to a different board and commission. Certainly, we've made a lot of efforts and continue to make efforts to improve our transit service in the city. Obviously, there's large dollars on the table from the provincial and federal governments for rapid transit services and bus stop amenities and all of those kind of things. But I did note in the report that when it comes to the ABCs, that the LTC's submission with the 15% increase in the first year and 5.9 average is driven in large part by the cancellation of the planned doubling of the provincial gas tax. First question is, when you're doing the calculations of the provincial downloading impact, was the cancellation of the gas tax considered part of the provincial downloading cost or not?
Ms. Barone.
Yes, through the chair. So I can also answer Councillor Turner's. I have the number. So the total provincial impact, so this would be across all service areas as well as the boards and commissions, is averaging slightly more than $10 million a year. So quite a bit higher than what we had originally projected. Part of that number is exactly what Councillor Lewis has referred to, is the gas tax amount. It's roughly $5 million. That is a permanent base budget reduction of that funding that they were drawing on in anticipation of the provincial gas tax moving to a greater share in the future. So by taking that out, because there isn't anything coming forward, most of that increase is primarily in 2020. So the numbers that are in the report is the entire amount, but as part of our submission and in the presentation that I had, when we broke that out, we did include that. And that's one of the key drivers that does drive the provincial impacts for the boards and commissions when we break it out. So a large amount of that 5% that they're showing is primarily attributable to that.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be my last question for now, and I'll let others have their opportunity then. In our budget submission from LTC, do we have a, because obviously it's not in the report here, is it separated out in terms of what's required to continue delivering base service versus what's required to provide new service enhancements? Because when I hear about, we don't have money in here for the transit subsidies, it's a big concern for me, and any of the core initiatives that we're undertaking, green bins, these are all things that we all, I think, want to see happen. So is their submission, does it include their service enhancement separate from their base operating or not? Just wondering.
So through the chair, I believe all of that is incorporated as part of their base budget submission. They do have an assessment growth business case that they have submitted as well. So my understanding is all of that's incorporated. I do not have a separate business case to break down anything further in terms of additional enhancements or things. Those are all incorporated as part of their base budget.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Hopkins next.
Thank you, Presiding Chair. I agree. I've got lots of questions here. I'm going to sort of just stay focused more for now, questions around the land ambulance. I do think there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now, right across the board. And it's coming from the provincial government. We really do not know where we're going. We do know downloading is happening. We've changed one amount from 4 million a couple months ago to 6.6 million, and who knows where we're going to go. Obviously, 2020 is where all the crunching is going to happen. I want to focus with the land ambulance. So getting back to the uncertainty that exists, I understand the provincial government is reviewing regionally land ambulance paramedics. How important is their review that they're going to be undertaking, but we don't know what the results are. How important is that to the conversation that we're having today around land ambulance and the increase that they're asking for?
Ms. Bourbeau.
So through the chair, that review, I understand, is going to take quite a while, and it's just only being initiated now. So in terms of what that looks like is really where that the formation of it, but in terms of the cost for the City of London, that really won't be impacted, at least in the short term, because that may depend on, similar to what's happening with the health unit, is depending on the changes, that the City of London will still have to pay a share based on some sort of a cost-sharing agreement, after the provincial share is taken into account. So it really becomes more of where the reporting relationship might exist in terms of who might be delivering that service and where it might be reporting into. But from a cost perspective, City of London will always have an obligation to pay a share. It might vary slightly depending on how that all rolls out. Potentially, if the service is actually being reviewed and becoming more efficient because it's being regionalized, it could actually have a positive impact in terms of trying to have some better economies of scale potentially. So from a cost sharing perspective, in the interim, there really isn't a lot that's going to have, at least for the next couple of years, in terms of what the City of London is going to be obligated to pay.
Thank you for that. So we're going to look at 17% regardless right now. I know in the past we've had conversation, Councillor Turner and Deputy Mayor Helmer have brought this to us on numerous times that we're going to be faced with increases when it comes to land ambulance. And not that I was thinking of 17%. Do we know what amount that represents, or is that really not important right now to understand the dollar value?
Are you, sorry, you're asking Ms. Barbon what the 17% average is in real dollars to the City of London's budget? I think she can certainly pull that together. Okay, we'll get that.
And if I may, just following up with, I totally agree with having a submission come forward to a public meeting that we're going to be asking Paramedic Service, Middlesex London, where's the county in this conversation? Is that an opportunity to have the county attend a meeting here? From what I understand, the county is the one that is making the decision. We get the invoice, and it would make sense to have that conversation amongst city, county, and paramedic service. But I'll just ask if we have an opportunity to do that.
My expectation, and Ms. Bourbon can confirm this, is that the county is the service provider, and they would likely, I would be surprised if they weren't a key player in that presentation. Obviously, the London Middlesex Paramedic Service chief was likely to be there, and likely the CAO of the county, but Ms. Barbon could confirm how that's contemplated, as well as I know that you look like you might have the number that Councillor Hopkins was looking for too.
Through the chair, so certainly they have some finance staff. Certainly I would expect the chief. Certainly, typically, the discussions we've had have also been with the county treasurer, as well as the county CAO that have had the discussions on land ambulance. So there would be a number of people there that there's other options to have discussions. There is a city-county liaison committee. The clerk may be able to correct me on what that exact thing is, but there is another body that does look at that. I forget the name. So in terms of the number that you were looking for, so on average, it's $3.5 million on average across the 4 years based on the initial submission that we did receive. Certainly 2020 was the most significant at 5.7. So that's what drives up the average, because the later years are a little bit lower.
Thank you for that, and I would definitely include as many people from the county on that invitation to come to speak to us. I think it's important that we also collaborate with them and listen to one another and have that fulsome conversation to understand the increases that we're faced with. I think for now, I'll sort of leave my comments till later.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. I think just at the onset here, I have to say that the 4% simply cannot stand. The people of London are not getting wage increases anywhere near that amount. And we just have to look at the 2016 census data, and we find out that London is below average in terms of median household income than the rest of the province of Ontario. So the ability to pay is not here. So therefore, these kinds of tax hikes that are being looked upon,
Councillor,
simply can't work. But I have a question here, and my question is simply this. My question is, given the magnitude of this land ambulance hike, I mean, clearly it's a shocker. Is it fair to say that most of this is because of the provincial downloading?
Ms. Bourbon, cause of the land ambulance hike.
Through the chair, I can't say for certain. Certainly, that is one component. How much that is, I don't know. Certainly, at the end of in August, there was an announcement that they did receive an increase, and certainly that was walked back from some of the original discussions from the province that there wasn't going to be much of an increase at all. So there has been some additional increases provided through the province, but I would hazard a guess that a lot of these other issues that are all public health related in terms of hospital, the dispatch system, they noted a number of items that were behind the increase that they're asking for. So I think really, because we don't deliver the service, I don't have that information, and because it hasn't been provided, I think that it would be up to the council to hopefully receive that information from our request to understand a little bit more what the key drivers are and if there's any flexibility in trying to reduce that further.
And Councillor, I just wanted to clear, I wasn't cutting you off because that wasn't appropriate for the meeting, but right now we're trying to get the question and answers from the presentation. When we get a motion on the floor, those are great comments on why we might want some options.
Okay. I just wanted to make the point. Thank you for that. It strikes me that if this is the underlying driver, that we're not the only ones in this predicament, that all our fellow municipalities across Ontario are in something similar. Do we know yet if our fellow municipalities are having similar hikes in their land ambulance areas?
Ms. Bourbon.
Through the chair, last month, I attended, we have a regional treasurers, single-tier regional treasurers meeting, and it was just after we had been presented with that information, so I actually did ask the question of all my colleagues across the province if anybody else was experiencing anything to that degree, and we are the only ones that I'm aware of that is anything quite that significant.
Well, then that's obviously very concerning. Maybe that will change, but certainly look forward to more information coming forward, and hope it comes forward soon.
Councillor Squire.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. One of the things you've told us is what the base is going to be in over 4 years and next year without any added investments. Over the course of the last year, we've heard about all kinds of business cases that are being developed for presentation during the budget process. Do you have any feel now or number now as to what the extent is of the business cases that will be coming before council? Do we have a number or anything like that?
Ms. Bourbon.
Through the chair, so that is something that we are working hard on right now. We have a number of business cases, and we're looking at all the submissions that have been put in front of us and are trying to look at ways to put something forward in a manner that would try to fit within the 0.5% that we had originally identified across the 4 years. So our work is not yet done. We don't have a number yet as of this point in time, but certainly that's something that we're still looking into hard to see if there are any reductions or ways that we can smooth that and pace it over the course of the 4 years to put something before council that would be more manageable than the full submissions that were identified as part of the strategic plan for additional investment.
Councillor Squire.
And through you, Mr. Chair, is that something we would see, because I find it very helpful, before we actually get into the budget discussion? Because in the past, what's happened is the budget documents are presented and then these business cases are there with some have staff recommendations, some don't. And I just wonder if, similar to the process you did today, are you going to come back to us before the budget process and say, look, here's all the business cases and here's what they add up to, and we've had a look at them, but just keep this in mind when you go through the budget process, because it seems to me, if we don't do work in that area and look at that area, doing all this work on the other areas isn't going to make a lot of sense, because it all has to add up to a reasonable number.
Ms. Bourbon.
So through the chair, we had not anticipated to bring those forward, as certainly there were a number of items that have been identified as part of the strategic plan. There was a number of other items since that time that have also been referred to the business case, to develop a business case and bring forward. So we've had also some from our boards and commissions that have come forward. So we're trying to work our way through them and look at prioritizing them and looking at some additional pacing options that would be able to be put in front of you. But all of those business cases will ultimately be a choice for council and would be included as a large number of them for consideration that they've been asked through a number of courses to have been brought before and deferred to the budget process for consideration. So what we're trying to look at is a number that we would recommend and then have all the other items as consideration, because we need to bring them forward as they were referred to the budget process to ensure that we follow through with council's request.
Councillor Squire, are you good?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Silly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if you were intending to move the motion as budget chair. If not, I'm happy to do that, but I just want to ask that question first just to get us to a...
Well, I'm chairing the meeting, so you're welcome to move a motion if you'd like. So if you want to put the recommended motion on the floor. I will say, if you want to take a look at the language, we did draft something up related to what Councillor Turner had suggested. It's a C is now I and II, and the second part of it says basically the first part is there as I, and the second part is the Middlesex London Paramedic Service be requested to provide as much written documentation as possible in support of their budget submission in advance of the above noted delegation before SPPC, to align with what Councillor Turner was suggesting.
So what I want to move is pretty much, sorry, one sec, just pulling that up as you're speaking. My screen just disappeared on me.
If you just hit current item, so there's 3 lines on the left-hand side, it drops it down a menu. Current item will always take you to the exact current item we are and where we are in the agenda. If there's any updates, they'll be there.
So I wanted to move everything minus B1, but just because I don't support that, but I'll speak to that later. So I'm happy to move everything else with and also I was looking to make an amendment on the current language, specifically B2, where we talk about engaging with city agency boards and commissions. I think we heard today here, that the police board has really, had that second look already, and half of the police board is here with us today. And I know the budget chair of the budget committee has worked aggressively to find those opportunities and significant savings in, $1 million. So I wanted to put that part in that portion of the motion, that the police board, we recognize that they've already done that, and that, we won't include them in that portion here. But then the part C with the Middlesex London, the invitation, in addition to what Councillor Turner has stated, I also wanted us to maybe turn our eyes to maybe seeing what we could do to strengthen our governance relationship, because I feel as if there's a gap right now. We don't really have some sort of a way to kind of, at governance level, we have had this liaison committee. They don't really have a say. So I wanted to include that to maybe staff to see if there's an opportunity, whether that means having a conversation with the province or speaking to the county, but somehow strengthening the governance relationship. So I'll move that.
So, Councillor, just I certainly won't suggest what you should do, but I think if you're interested in moving everything except one piece, maybe if other councillors are interested in moving that piece, maybe we let someone else move that and that piece can be voted on separately so that you can vote against it rather than leaving it out, because I think other colleagues were nodding that they would like to see that. So rather than do the awkward amend your motion to add it back in, we could certainly consider the adjustments to the other sections, but it's just a way that we might be able to proceed a little quicker if someone's willing to move the full staff motion, and then we could adjust it and vote on it separately if someone's against parts of it. I don't know, is that good with you? Yep. Okay. The Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, and I am prepared to move the whole staff motion with just a brief comment. What we find is that municipalities are both the front line and the bottom line when it comes to the provision of direct services to Londoners. And what we're all trying to do here as we review this process is balance care and cost. And I know that we'll have other opportunities to discuss individual budget items, but I think in speaking in favor of moving the full motion, it's because of the direction that it's taking in terms of looking at potential reductions within civic service areas, engaging with the city's agencies, boards, and commissions to encourage them to submit potential opportunities and reductions, inviting Middlesex London Paramedic Services, and I think Councillor Turner's comments were helpful as well in terms of providing information in advance to help us make sense of this process. So I'm prepared to move it in full, and I'll leave that for you to consider a seconder, Chair.
Sure, I don't mind seconding the staff recommendation. I will say, Councillor Salee suggested a couple of items related to this. The one, I wouldn't mind seeing if there's consensus on, so we can just include it in the motion. If there's not, then we'll consider it through an amendment process, is the exclusion of the police board, because they've already taken a second look at their budget. Does anybody object to that being built into the actual motion in B? Because if not, we can just word that in. It would be, we're going back to all the boards and commissions who are above target to take a second look at their budget and forward options. Councillor Salee was suggesting, given the police board just had a recent meeting where they took a second look at their budget and lowered it, that we just be specific and noted that we're not going to ask them to do it again. So if people reject, aren't okay with that being in the motion, then I'm just trying to speed things along so we don't have to do an amendment process. So if everybody's okay with that being part of the motion, okay, people are not, so you're gonna have to do that as an amendment. Okay? So, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Unless it's, I've already spoken to moving the motion, so unless there's a comment to change it, there's nothing to speak to yet.
What we have now is a motion moved and seconded. Colleagues who are interested in adjusting it, there's certainly still a chance to get questions answered from our staff. There is another piece that I wanted to note for colleagues that I should have mentioned at the start, but then I forgot in all the excitement of presenting, and that is in discussion with our staff, it may be advantageous to give our staff a little more time, given the process we're establishing in the development of the tabling of the budget, which is scheduled for December 9th. I know the mayor and I had a conversation about potential dates for a special meeting the following week, which would be the 17th. And it was the intention to float that today to see if council has any objection to that, because certainly we want to have the table budget with as much information as possible. That is what all the public consultation will be based on. Not all of this information may come back and maybe have to be presented later, but I know our treasurer and her team having a little more time would allow her to finish that work. So certainly feel free to comment on that as well as we move forward. But right now, we've got a moved and seconded motion. I will look for a speaker's list. I have Councillor Salee, who's probably going to make an amendment.
So on the first item, I would like to make that amendment related to the police service board. So I'll move that, look for a seconder, and I believe Councillor Lewis was interested in that, so.
Okay, so the amendment, although we'll get wording, is essentially to exclude the police services board from the ask in BI2, which is going to the boards and commissions who have submitted draft budgets in excess of the targets and encouraging them to submit potential options for reduction.
Just for the language is clear, noting that they already had a second look.
Okay, we'll make sure that that's noted in your amendment. It's moved and seconded. It's probably easiest to deal with this amendment right now because it's on the floor. So I'll look for comments and debate on the amendment. Yes, Councillor Lewis seconded. Councillor Squire.
I won't support the amendment, not because I don't believe and know, in fact, that the Police Services Board has gone back and taken a second look at their budget, but armed with the information we have today, which really paints a very desperate situation, I don't think it's going to harm anyone to go back and have another look. Now, if they say, we have had a look and we don't want to engage and we're not going to have another look, so be it, and then that budget will come to council. But I just don't see the harm in saying, take this opportunity to have another look.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I'm not supportive of the amendment. I understand the work that the police services have done through their budgetary process, but I also understand there are a number of other boards and agencies that are doing the exact same thing. For instance, I sit on the Upper Thames Conservation Board. We submitted our draft, and we are, as a reminder to all of council, these are all draft budgets that we're talking about right now. Final budgets aren't approved on most of the boards and agencies and commissions until January. So on the Upper Thames Conservation Authority Board, we every month review the draft budget. We have reduced it from our submission in July by $150,000. And as much as I have concerns about supporting to and going back to boards and agencies, because they are tough conversations to be having, given the downloading that we're getting from the provincial government, not receiving $170,000 for flood control. We've got to come up with that money. So I think there's a number of boards and agencies that are struggling and redoing and revisiting. I think the Police Service Board is no different. And I think having that opportunity and that conversation should still remain. If we start picking out boards, we're creating, I think, a little bit of, I'm not sure where we're going with the amendment.
There's language on the screen if you hit current item. I see you nodding. If you're not okay with that, let me know as soon as possible. The next person on the speaker's list is Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I just wanted to ask staff if there are any other agencies or boards that we are not requesting to do a second look. I know we know that LTC is going to be asking something about 15%, and we know that housing is going to be asking something about around 17%. So are we also asking them to go back and do that look again, or are we removing those two out and then also policing?
The way the motion is worded, it's everyone who was above the target. There were about 3, I think, who were at or below the target who would not be asked to take a second look. And then the amendment is to exclude the police. So it wouldn't exclude anybody else. It would be everybody. And there's a list of where people stand on page 6 of the report, which outlines where they are. The target was 1.5. So you'll see Eldon House, RBC Place, and tourism were at or below that. Go ahead.
So just to speak on this motion, if we are asking everyone to go back and take a second look, I think that everybody should go through the process. And when we have these discussions coming back in the budgeting time, we can talk about, once we have the business cases presented to us, we can talk about where the increases will be and where they will not be. Because if that's what we're going to do today, then we can sit here and start mentioning a few other boards that we think should do a second look. I think it's fair that we ask everybody to do the same thing.
Councillor Chair, on the amendment. No, that Councillor Van Holst is on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. The language for Part B2 is fairly soft. We're just asking the city to engage their agencies and encourage them to submit potential opportunities. So that's not very demanding. They could simply say, well, no, we've already done this and we're finished.
Okay, I don't have any other speakers on the amendment except for Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I wanted to hear what my colleagues thought about this one before weighing in. I would just say, I think it's important that we don't waste time and get people doing work that is not going to result in anything substantial. So what I would say from the police board perspective is that we had a draft budget that talked about having about 15 officers hired in the first year of the budget. Over the course of the year, it's going to be 20 officers added into the base budget. And the police board decided to cut that back a bit because we recognized that it was too much. So the need is very significant. And we suggested 5 instead of 20, plus some assessment growth positions, which I think are well justified from a growth perspective. And as a result of that, the police budget in the last year, I think it was down about 0.8% compared to what the draft was. So that was $962,000 lower than what the original one was. So that's a pretty substantial change that has already been made. And I just don't think that there's any value at all in being like, let's go do that whole thing again. If there was something more to be reduced, we would have done that already. So I just think it's already been done. If all the other boards and commissions had already also done that, I would say, well, what are we wasting their time with? And so I think there's a good reason to not have the London Police Services. I'm not getting into the debate about whether I think, you know, there's any actual opportunities to reduce any of these other agencies. I'm not as familiar with those agencies, with the exception of the Transit Commission. And so, you know, I would encourage people to vote for this, to just take it off the table. There's a lot of anxiety that comes from, hey, well, now there might be more reductions. And, you know, like, there's already enough uncertainty. At the police, we've had to accommodate essentially 5 positions, $640,000 from the provincial downloading on the police, right? They cut back the grants to London Police Service. We have to now, the municipal taxpayer has to pay for those 5 positions. Those are already existing positions. So we've absorbed the 5 positions. We've reduced the amount of growth. I think it's very reasonable, and I don't think there's much left. So, you know, why set up? It's a big organization. It's a big undertaking to go and let's review everything again. I just don't think it's going to result in much. If I did, I would support it.
Mayor Holder.
Thank you. Along with 2 other members of council, I'm a member of the London Police Services, and look, I have great respect and regard for how they've handled their budget approach. But let me say, colleagues, I'm terribly concerned about precedents, particularly with our agencies, boards, and commissions, if we say, well, we'll include all of you, but we'll exclude you. And it may well be, that the London Police come back and say we've done the very best that we can. But I think it's prudent financial planning to make that ask, and notwithstanding anxieties and concerns that any individual group would have. Well, look, if I'm above the budget task, any of the agencies, boards, and commissions would have those concerns. Again, I want to reiterate, I think that the Police Services Board has done a tremendous job, and I think London Police Service, having come back and made a number of recommendations, but I wouldn't exclude them from the standpoint of establishing what I think would be an inappropriate and discomforting precedent.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I comment on the amendment, I have a question through you to staff. We know that the London Police originally submitted a 2.7 average annual increase and then resubmitted a draft, because Councillor Hopkins is right, it's still a draft, of 2.5. Have any other boards or commissions submitted an initial draft and then submitted a second draft with a different number? Or is this the only board or commission that's submitted an amended draft at this time?
Ms. Barbon.
Through the chair, the police is the only ones that have submitted an amended budget from their initial submission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with that question answered, I think that highlights exactly the reason why this amendment is there. The police board has submitted a draft budget and then actually heard the concerns expressed by councillors on social media, in the public, through the mainstream media, and met and worked hard and came back with something that was lower. They're the only board and commission that has done that so far. So to Deputy Mayor Helmer's point about asking them to do something they've already done, we haven't seen the other boards and commissions do that. We've had 3 that have actually met the target we asked them to meet. I don't think it's reasonable to ask those 3 to dig back in. They've delivered on what we asked them to do. The police is still a little high, but they came back to us with a second draft budget that found some savings. So I think they've done what the intent of this motion is. So I really encourage colleagues to consider that. How much more time do we want the police board to spend on this budget? We know that right now, on any given time, they've got 40 plus calls waiting in the queue. They're responding to all kinds of calls that are not policing matters, but they're on the front lines right now. So for them to look for 5 additional officers at this point, I don't think is unreasonable. So I'd encourage colleagues to support this.
Okay, that's the speaker's list. Everybody's ready to vote on the amendment? Okay, we're going to open that for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's lost, 6-7.
Okay, so that will remain in the motion. Back to the main debate, Councillor Squire.
I'm not going to ask for reconsideration. I voted the wrong way. So I meant to vote against it and I voted for it. I don't think that would change the result. So I'm not going to ask, but I just for the record want to note that I haven't done that before, but I'm proud to have done it today. I voted the wrong way.
Okay, it wouldn't have changed the result. Appreciate the comments. For the record, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to a point I made a long time ago, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but now probably a lot more pertinent. Perhaps through you to Ms. Barbone. Is there the potential for us to investigate, to really look at services offered by the municipality or provided by the municipality in service for the province that we might seek to withdraw from pending better equalization of payments and transfers associated with the downloads. So I bring up, I know I get some weird looks, but back when ambulance services, for example, were faced with a significant increasing volume of calls, but not a collateral increase in funding from the province, a lot of ambulance services saw themselves kind of moving out of interfacility transfers, which is why you see private transfer operators moving patients between hospitals right now. One of the things that we do that's a provincial service is court security, for example. London Police Service offers LPS officers in order to provide that security for the court, which is a provincial responsibility. There have been funding increases to help support those, but it still very much is a provincial function. I'd imagine there's a number of other ones throughout this that we might be able to investigate and look to withdraw from. I think it's important to kind of make the point, and I'm not sure if there are opportunities from that that we might be able to investigate.
Councillor, I'll go to Ms. Bourbon in a sec. In my discussions with the Treasurer, part of that question is what of the provincial downloading or what are the services that we actually may have a choice on? Now, they may have consequences to it if it was a cost-sharing agreement and we decided not to participate, that we would give up other funding. My thought and my understanding from what the Treasurer's said before is everything that is a possible option will be presented as an option in the budget for us to consider, but I'll go to Ms. Barbone to confirm that. Oh, or Mr. Hayward actually wants to flag that one.
So through the chair, I just add actually to what the chair had indicated that you know, to just jump out where there are requirements, that would be problematic. However, provincially, I know that there's been a number of talk among, especially Lumco municipalities, about this issue and what areas can we get out of doing. Also looking at the not only who does what, who pays for what piece again. It was done in the early 2000s, and I think it needs to be revisited, and I think it's something that, from a government relations point of view, we should certainly be pushing for, to take another look at that, but I think that's a bit of a longer-term approach. In terms of the short term, anything where we, you know, the province is vacating, the sort of the standard rule we're following is that we will not be entering that area. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there are impacts, and we need to make that you aware of that. So,
Ms. Barbone, I don't know if you want to just make sure I was right in my statement. Shouldn't have spoke for you. Sorry.
Through the chair, just to add to that, so what we will be presenting as part of the budget is with all the provincial impacts, there is a small portion that we absolutely have to pay where the cost sharing has increased, but a large number of them are choices in terms of, and very similar to what Mr. Hayward had said, is that, you know, childcare, I'll use childcare as an example, is that there was provincial funding previously that if we want to continue to maintain that, you need to put into a municipal share also. So you could choose to not participate in that additional cost sharing requirement and say no thank you to that funding. Obviously there are impacts to that because some of the great work that has been done with that money in the past, you would forego that. So certainly we will clearly identify all of the provincial impacts, both civic administration as well as the boards and commissions, what there is a true choice and what those potential impacts might be.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think the intent of what I'm saying is, one, certainly not to have anything that has impact on people or environment, for example. Those are really important parts that I see the province has tried to withdraw from in a lot of circumstances. I think the municipality's obligations to its citizens is very high, and it's something that I think we should maintain. There are some administrative type functions that we perform for the province that those would be the basis of it. At the outset of the discussion, I think it was set for this debate to talk about identifying opportunities where we might see some cost mitigative measures. Mr. Hayward had identified back during downloading at the beginning of the millennium that there was a who does what study prior to downloads occurring, where the province actually spent some time to take a look and rationalize services between municipalities and the province to figure out what could be downloaded, but with that also went some uploading, and that hasn't occurred here. So I think it's incumbent on us to kind of push the play a little bit and find those opportunities to put some pressure back on the province instead of us just taking it.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Through you to staff, I want to go back to the land ambulance issue. I understand what our legislative requirements are, but I also, I'm wondering, like, does that mean a blank check? I know the way we do the cost sharing with Middlesex London Health Unit between the county and the city, there's a board, there's representation from the province, the county, and the city. The meetings are open and transparent, they're televised, we have media there. Doesn't seem to be the case with land ambulance. So if there were any kind of dispute, who would mediate that? So if this continues and we don't get a submission, but rather just this is what the cost is, and we need your money, what are our options for pushing back?
Ms. Barbone. Or Mr. Card, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, we have looked at that. There's, I guess, a three-level response. The first response is one where we express our unhappiness about some aspect of the service delivery, and that would result in the creation of an informal body that would look at it, and there would be appointees. I think it's 3 appointees from each of the each of the county and the city, and I think they're staff people in the first instance. If the dispute can't be resolved at that level, then it can be escalated to a level that is the county-city liaison committee, and it's composed of politicians from both municipalities, and they attempt to go through the same process and resolve it. And if that doesn't work, the final step is arbitration.
Councillor Cassidy.
So I know there's been some from our local representative in the provincial government, there's been some public comments made about conservation authorities and how the provincial government may be looking at what their mandate is and what the services are that they provide, and you know, that it is what it is, and whatever comes of that, who knows. But is the province weighted in very much here as far as, so we know that they're changing cost sharing and all of that sort of thing, but do you anticipate any kind of support from the province for this kind of process that we're going through right now, where we're not provided with backup documentation to support the budget request? Would the province wade in on that at all?
Mr. Card.
Mr. Chairman, I think there are some possible political solutions to this kind of an impasse. The mechanism that we have, though, for trying to resolve disputes is a product of our agreement with the county. So, I mean, this wasn't a mechanism that was created for the first time in last year's agreement. It was one that was in existence, probably from the first agreement, and it was just carried forward. There hadn't been any disputes, and so it, it seemed reasonable to carry forward on that basis. However, now that we have a dispute, I think there's a few issues that have come to light, and the treasurer has advised you of a few of them. I see a few more that are of a political nature. For example, the city pays something like 90%, maybe more than 90% of the total cost of the ambulance service. The county, the service administrator pays something like 9%, if I have my numbers correct. And they have 5 of the 13 EMS stations are actually located in the county. So basically, there's a population, I think, of something like 60,000 in the county, and they have 5 stations. That's 1 to 12,000. The city has 8, and we have a population of 400,000. You can see that the number of people served by each ambulance station is considerably different. But I say this is a political issue because right from the start of the new program, I think it resulted from studies done in the late 90s. The province had indicated that some of the ambulance services in the province weren't solvent and weren't delivering the kind of response that the people of Ontario required. And that's why they consolidated the operations. The private operators largely exited, and we got into more of a public sector service delivery model. But the components of it are still fairly small. And I think one of the things that the province announced in the budget was they were looking at achieving additional efficiencies. Presumably those efficiencies would benefit municipalities because we're the ones that pay for the cost. But we don't have any details of what the province is intending. They're looking at health units as a priority. They're looking at the community care LHIN health groups as another priority. And I think in third place comes the EMS services. So we haven't had much information so far, and we're not expecting any soon as far as I know. So there could be a political solution, but the present problem is one that we could say is of our own making. We have to deal with through the process. It will take time to do that. Ultimately, if there is no solution, or if the numbers don't support the kind of actions the county's been taking, maybe we have an argument for political intervention.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about how some of the operating budget issues, which is what we've kind of been focusing on in the discussion, are tied into capital plans. So we have some capital plans that are already sort of underway, and some, even with the agencies, boards and commissions, sometimes these things are very tightly linked. So specifically, when it comes to transit, for example, we have a public transit infrastructure stream approved project for 31 new buses, right, to pay for growth of the transit system over the next few years, and then a couple of years beyond the planning horizon. Those are approved and funded now, which is great for property taxpayers because it's coming from the province and the federal government. But if we don't grow the service, we don't actually need the buses. So how are we going to reconcile things like that, where you have capital funding things that have already been approved, they're ready to go, and then you've got operating budget impacts that would be, counter to that?
Ms. Bourbon.
So through the chair, as part of the corporate financing, where we have there's capital levy, there's contributions from our reserve funds and other sources of financing that come in as well as part of that plan. So in the 10-year capital plan, the capital financing and some of the reserve fund contributions you saw the other day from some of those funds in terms of where we took a look at those, but that's all part of the budget, and based on what we have right now, we have the appropriate amount of capital contributions to support the capital plan. So that'll be certainly part of the presentation when we bring forward the detailed budget when we deliberate and present the budget. That is all being currently finalized right now, but those increases were anticipated as part of the development of the budget. Where, we do a 10-year capital plan, so that is not a significant change from what we were anticipating, and certainly some of the provincial funding, federal provincial funding that we've received has actually helped us in mitigating some of the costs and have that all come through in the end to give us a little bit of capacity, but certainly it was helpful.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I have an amendment to suggest send it to the clerk. And basically, I do think there's an opportunity with the Transit Commission to try and work on the capital side of the budget, where there are some other funding sources that are not property taxes, to try and maximize those things and take some of the pressure off the capital levy, which otherwise is drawn on to pay for some of these things. We've discussed that at the Transit Commission. I believe that discussions are underway, but I think in this kind of review, personally, that's where I think there's going to be some kind of changes that could happen that might benefit the overall city budget, more so than on the operating side. I mean, I guess we'll see what comes back. I'm very skeptical that anyone's going to like any of the things that come back. So the motion is to have civic administration be directed to work with LTC to identify opportunities to replace City of London capital levy funding for capital projects with non-property tax sources of financing, such as one-time doubling of the federal gas tax funding. So, you know, there's some things that have happened that I think we need to be looking at to make sure we maximize those things, see if there's anything to be done on the capital side. So hopefully there's some support for that. I think it's just to have the conversation.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor Helmer is moving that. Is there a seconder? I see Councillor Selly is willing to second. Questions and comments on that amendment? Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I'm glad the deputy mayor came forward with that. I think what he's saying is let's at least look at it. Let's have a look and see if it's something that can help. And obviously I'm on London Transit too, and the concern is that we're trying to grow a system to meet the needs of bus rapid transit. And so we're in sort of a very difficult situation if we don't continue to do the things in transit that we said we were going to do. So I think it's great, and it's a suggestion. We'll look at it and see if it works, so I'll be supporting it.
Okay, great. Councillor Van Holst, I had you on the original list, and then I saw you kind of, I don't know if you're looking to speak to this amendment too, but you kind of put your hand up, so.
Yes, thank you. Of course, we have a hard job and now it's harder. So looking at ideas to finesse is encouraging. I like what's being suggested as an idea, although I wonder if this is a potential opportunity for a reduction. And if it is, then that seems to fit in with the language that we've got already. So maybe I'd ask through you, Mr. Budget Chair, to the draft of the motion, is that having made the suggestion, do we actually need an amendment? Or does that fall into the language of B2 already? Well,
There's a mover and a seconder for the amendment, so irrespective of that potential question, it's on the floor, so we can proceed with it unless it's withdrawn. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm happy to answer the question. If I thought it were redundant, I wouldn't bring it up. So I think there's value in focusing the conversation, but I appreciate where the councillor is coming from. He thinks that it is. I just want to focus on the capital budget. Almost everything in the report is about the operating side, and I just want to make sure that we're looking at that as well.
Okay, that's all the speakers I have on this amendment. If everybody's good. Yep, I'll open that for voting. This is on the amendment.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Okay, main motion. I don't have any speakers. Except for Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Helmer and Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Just looking for a little more insight into the provincial budget impacts. I'm looking at figure 2 on page 4 of our agenda. It shows that there's 0.9% in 2020, and that goes down to 0.2% in 2021, and there's no further impacts in 2022 and 2023. So I just look to our treasurer through you to describe the difference between what's happening in 2020 and 2021 in terms of what we're seeing from the province.
Councillor Van Holst, I'll just point out on that particular chart, these are charts that we've seen before and are included in the report. It's not the most recent iteration of this, which is in the the budget presentation slides. So I'll certainly have the treasurer comment on it. I just want to make sure colleagues realize that these particular numbers have been adjusted given the treasurer's most recent presentation today as well.
Yes, thank you. I don't have the slides in front of me.
We can certainly put that slide up again if you'd like to see it, and but I'll have the treasurer address your question.
So through the chair, the majority of the provincial downloading impacts do take effect in 2020. However, the one that was deferred a little bit further was the changes with respect to the cost sharing in childcare. It does not take effect until 2021. So that's why you see a little portion that is still remaining. Most of it is all effective next year.
Thank you.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
This is where we get into discussion, like debate on the actual motion, right? Yeah. So I wanted to hold back and just have a couple questions there because I think I wanted to clear those up. I generally support the idea of, sure, like, let's take another look at some of these things. I think that's very reasonable. And I think it's generally just part of the budget process anyway. We have a lot of back and forth. It's obviously kind of an extraordinary set of circumstances where we have a lot of provincial changes hitting at the same time in all different areas. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about, for example, what's going on in childcare, but these are very significant impacts on the city and across a whole bunch of range of services. So I think it's reasonable to look at it. I do have to say though that like I'm not on board with, okay, you balance the provincial budget and we're just going to cut services and cut back on stuff at the municipal level. Like, no, thank you. You know, the province has got all kinds of things they fund directly that they do. And I mean, don't just come to us and say, okay, we're going to cut this and that, and sorry, oh, it causes problems for you at the municipal level. Too bad. You know, I think we really need to be very firm with the province to say, you know, doing it all at once is not a great idea. Also, just kind of coming out with not a lot of consultation on the front end, and then saying, well, what does this actually mean? Also not a good idea. And so, you know, I think we're gonna have to make a lot of tough decisions because it's the budget and it's always difficult to decide what is gonna go forward and what we're gonna do and what we're not gonna do. So I think we need to stay focused on that. These provincial things that the province is doing, I mean, they need to be responsible for those things, right? And we need to be clear with people, that's why that is happening. Because I just don't think that we should accept the responsibility for changes that they're making at the provincial level. I know it's going to be very difficult because we're looking at already very significant property tax increases just in the base and with the provincial downloading, let alone any of the like urgent things we need to move on, like housing. So I think it's going to be a difficult process. I don't want us to get too hopeful about what's going to come back from this review. I don't think this is going to save, you know, the budget process. At best, I think it's going to get a couple small opportunities that might help a little bit. But I think we're in for a really tough set of budget discussions. And I, for one, I don't want to let the province off the hook for the things that they have done. Obviously, there's things we do, and there's things that they're doing.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for those comments, Deputy Mayor Helmer, because I agree with them completely. I think it is really important that we understand where these increases are coming from. If anything, you know, I want to thank staff for their recommendation and generally supportive, but really the reality is that we're going to have increases, and we're going to have, in particular, 2020 with the provincial downloading, and that it has to be communicated, I think, to the public, and have the public understand that provincial downloading and where these taxes are coming from, and really educating the public on that. I'm skeptical a little bit, even though I will support the recommendation of how many, what we're going to find here in reductions. We're looking at civic service areas. That's great. We're already at 2.1 as well. How much more we can get? I think it's worth a look. But the reality is, it may not be a lot of money. Looking at boards and commissions to ask them to review their draft budgets again is fair. But for me, B2 is really boards and commissions have to come back and be prepared to address their increases. And I think to me, that is the important part in B2. And again, supporting a future meeting with Middlesex County. So generally supportive, but not high hopes.
Okay, that exhausts the speakers list. We have a move to second motion. If there's no other speakers, I just wanted to make a closing comment after Councillor Lehman shares his thoughts.
Sorry, I just feel I have to weigh in here. You know, I understand the province has downloaded things to municipalities. But we can't just say, well, it's the province's fault, so we're just going to have to jump taxes. We've talked a lot about affordable housing, and problem with property tax, it's a regressive tax. Regardless of your income, people want to stay in their homes, they're mandated to pay property tax. So I'm not going to take the easy out and saying, well, it's on the province's shoulders, it's their fault we're jacking up property taxes. I think we set a target in the spring, and it was a reasonable target given what we knew at that time, what the province downloading was going to be. I'm going to work very hard to maintain those targets that we set back in spring. I want to see housing affordability addressed, and provincial and property taxes are a part of housing costs that people have no choice in paying.
Okay, Councillor Lewis and Councillor Van Holst, we can certainly hear from you, but I think we're getting to some consensus here, but let's go ahead, Councillor Lewis.
I would agree with you, Mr. Chair. I think we are getting to some consensus, and I'll be brief. I do agree with some of what Councillor Lehman said. I also agree with what Councillor Turner said about some of these services like court security costs. If we have to put them back on the province, let's do that. Let's not let them put all of this on us. And maybe we do lose some cost sharing agreements, but if there's opportunities to do that, I'm certainly prepared to stand with you on that, because I don't think that we should be on the hook and take all of the downloading that they're giving us. I also do think, to Councillor Lehman's point, that we do have to keep in mind the affordability component for our residents as well. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. I think people have made some great points here tonight, and we've got a lot more work ahead when this comes back, because I too am not hopeful that the rates are going to come back significantly lower. I think we may see, you know, a few opportunities, as Deputy Mayor Helmer indicated. We're going to have to make some tough decisions about what's a need to have and what's a nice to have. And frankly, why are we holding the province's hand when it's their responsibility to let them do it?
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I want to add to Councillor Lehman's important words. I have seniors on fixed incomes. They write me and say that at the end of the month, they don't have money left over for food. And when we raise their taxes, they go hungry longer. So we have to make sure we keep that in mind. On the other hand, I have people that say, I'm willing to pay more for more services. And I hope that we can somehow find ways for people to get services from us rather than charging everybody. If somebody wants something, maybe there's things that we can give them, and they can get that without a burden being on everyone. It's going to take some creativity on our part to do that.
Thanks. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. I wasn't going to comment on this, but I'm sensing some really anti-provincial dialogue around this, and I don't want to reopen this dialogue, but colleagues, I deal with federal and provincial governments, and there's not one that I have experienced, even at the federal level when I used to be involved, but currently now, there's no level of government that takes any joy in or satisfaction in downloading and putting pressures on that I'm aware of. I don't think it's a philosophical thing that any government says, let's see how we can discomfort another level of government by doing this. Look, as I said in earlier comments, we're the front line and the bottom line, and so it all ultimately falls to us. But I'm not sure that any council that I'm aware of would have ever pushed back against any prior government at the provincial level when they provided funding increases for certain things, knowing that the potential, or maybe not knowing, that a day of reckoning might come or would come. So I'm mindful about this, the issue of being very specific and secular as it relates to your province, you do this, your municipal, so you do that. There's a caution I would say to all of us: be careful what we wish for. That may not come to as positive an end as it otherwise might. So, I'm prepared and comfortable as I moved the motion and supported the amendment, as it is, to work with it as it is. I think it gives us enough flexibility, but I'm just cautionary about being strident, and I think when we do this, we need to do this in a very thoughtful way. We're in elected office 3 more years. This provincial government's in elected office 3 more years. And we are creatures of the province. And I think having a cooperative, it's like cooperative federalism. This is cooperative provincialism, I guess, and municipalism, there's a word. But we've got to work with them. And look, I think everything's on the table. I think that's quite legitimate. And so I'll support any kind of dialogue that gets us to the right place, appreciating that there's one taxpayer. Just the caution, though, about when we deal with the province, same as dealing with the federal government, that there are influences and there are requests for programming that we ask. We have said time and again, no municipality can do this alone. We need federal and provincial support. So just a cautionary, the study's worthwhile. I support it. I say colleagues and to you, Chair, let's get on with the study and see what our ABCs are prepared to do. What we're all prepared to do is we take a hard look at this.
Councillor Squire.
I think I'm uncomfortable with the idea that if what we're suggesting, Mr. Chair, is to throw stones at a provincial government that was duly elected, that's making certain decisions with regard to their budget and what they need to do, I'm not in for that. The same as I wasn't in for a previous government who may have had a different point of view. We're creatures of the provincial government. And what I'm going to do as we go forward and work on the budget is do the best I can to meet the targets that were set. I know it's going to be difficult, but it's something that I believe we're going to have to do. We're also going to have to go back, in my view, and look at some of the commitments that we sort of loosely made to spend money in different areas and focus on the things that I think are core to the municipal function, whether it's transit or infrastructure. Housing is something that's become important, and focus on those issues. But certainly it's not going to be my goal to throw stones or anything like that at a provincial government.
Councillor Cassidy and then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Question through you to the Treasurer, and hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot. So just on table 1 on page 4, we have the total tax levy increase as submitted. I wonder if so that's the aggregate amount. And we always talk about that, and that's the number that the media reports on. I wonder if you can give a rough idea what the actual in that rough number, that's not going to be the final budget number, but what the actual residential increase might be. And I apologize to put you on the spot like that.
Well, I'm pretty sure she knows it. Ms. Barbon.
So through the chair, so that's based on our tax policy. So based on our tax policy for 2019, that is the total, so 4% is across the budget requirements. So based on the current, the residential number is far lower, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, and I bet Councillor Morgan does. But it is significantly lower, so that's parsed out. But what that means is that some classes are higher, some classes are lower, and it evens out. But this is the total budget requirement that we need, and then based on the tax policy, which will be set in by April of next year, that may or may not change in terms of how that increase would be then parsed out.
Thank you. So I just want to bring that up because we talk about the big number, and that is not the number that is generally the residential increase. And over the last 4 or 5 years, actually, the residential increase has been below inflation. So it's important that everybody know that. So for the commercial and industrial classes, the rate is generally higher, but we are very competitive in our rates that way as well, because our staff stay on top of that, and they know that we have to maintain our competitive status in the province. But it's important to my constituents as well in Ward 5 that tax increases remain reasonable. It is a regressive tax. We don't want to force anybody out of their homes, but the media, our staff, this council, we always talk about the bigger number that includes all the tax classes together and then averaged out. The residential rate is actually much lower than that.
Okay, I don't have any other speakers. I wouldn't mind making some final comments, but I don't want to. Okay, so I want to thank colleagues for the debate today. I think it was really good. I certainly would encourage everybody to support the motion that we've crafted with the amendments. I want to thank our treasurer and our staff too for pulling together a lot of this information very quickly. And as I mentioned in my introductory comments, there's a lot of this is information that is landing, you know, as we speak and will be landing in the days to come. The motion we have before us is really about creating options. I know some of the debate tonight is certainly great debate for the budget process. There will be trade-offs, there'll be decisions, there'll be tax rates, there'll be implications on homeowners. I think today is about providing ourselves with some options for that particular discussion, setting the stage to have some conversations with some important partners. I will say our agencies, boards, and commissions, I know they put together and done a lot of work on their budget. What happens when all of those budgets are submitted together and totaled for us as the municipality is we're in a situation where we're beyond our target. We've got items in our strategic plan we want to fund. We've got things we forwarded to the budget process. So what we foresee is some debate and decision-making ahead. Going back to them and asking for them to take a look at their budgets and provide us with some options, I think is a reasonable approach, and I hope that you support the motion as it's been crafted before us. I will comment, because I can't resist it, on Councillor Cassidy's comments about it's really easy to say 4% tax increase on the average Londoner, but it really is, that is the size of the budget pie. How it is proportioned is a much more complicated system, and how it impacts the individual ratepayer is a function of our tax policy. So that was the answer I was expecting the treasurer to give, although very, anyways. Thank you for the debate tonight, and if there's no further discussion, I'll open this for voting. And okay, so what we're gonna do, Councillor Sally just signaled to me, there was one piece that he wanted voted on separately, and that was BI, which is the business cases for reductions in the civic services area, correct? Okay, so the first motion we will do is she's just going to pull it up. I'll tell you which one we're doing first. We're going to do BI first. So this is the one that you wanted pulled out, and then we'll do everything else after. Yeah, so we're opening the vote on BI, which the actual text is in the motion there, so you'll be able to see that. And this is the develop business cases for potential reductions to civic service areas.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 11-2.
So we'll move to everything else that's left. Councillor Turner?
Mr. Chair, just to be clean, I don't see the health unit disaggregated from number 2 there, so perhaps I could just abstain from that component instead of making it complicated and asking for it to be all separate. And it's really just a procedural motion more than anything. You know, it would just allow me to navigate through this without any difficulty.
So what you're asking is for us to do II separately, but not break out II. Okay. Right now, we're going to do A and C, so not the part that you're asking to pull out, because that's what we were closest to pulling together. So for efficiency, we'll do those other 2 pieces, and then we'll do the last piece of the PC. We'll make sure we do that separate. Right now, that's not the one that's going to be on the screen. We're just adding BIII, which was the Transit Commission amendment, back into this so that we only have 2 votes left rather than 3. Okay, so we're opening the rest for voting with the exception of BII, which is the parts about asking the boards and commissions.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
And now we will put up BII, which is the boards and commissions direction.
Councillor Lewis? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 11-1 with 1 recuse.
Okay, now, given what I mentioned before about the tabling of the budget date and that the only thing on the December 9th meeting is the tabling of the budget, with the advice of the clerks, we're going to ask for a motion to change that date from the 9th to the 17th. Mayor Holder's willing to move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis. That'll be pulled up on the screen in a second. Any discussion? Nope, we'll get that up in a moment. Okay, we have that up. We'll open the vote.
I believe you said 17th. It says 16th on the screen.
Yeah, can you change that? I was just reading it too before I voted. Okay, now we have the vote open for the change to December 17th.
Chair, I'll vote manually yea.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-0.
Okay, that concludes the business items. There's no allowable additional item, business or deferred matters. This is a special meeting, so a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. All those in favor? That carries. We're adjourned.